Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we're going to talk about pronouns, those little words that allow us to refer to nouns without repeating the nouns over and over again. And of course, we can also refer to ourselves and to each other by using pronouns. We have plenty of pronouns in English, and as in Hebrew, they can even be singular or plural, masculine or feminine, first, second, or third person. We even have different forms depending on whether the pronoun is the subject of the verb or the object. I shot the sheriff, but the deputy shot me. It's I when I'm the subject of the verb, me when I'm the object. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All kinds of different forms of pronouns depending on what they're doing in the sentence. Hebrew's also got a lot of different pronouns, and they too are masculine or feminine, singular or plural, first, second, or third person. English has that neuter gender, it, but Hebrew doesn't, just masculine or feminine. And there are different forms for the subject, the object, and the possessive. As with everything in this course, look for patterns. In this case, look for the similarities between the different forms for the same PGN, the same person, gender, and number. I, me, and mine are all going to resemble each other, so look for the similarities as we go. Let's start with the subject pronouns, the ones that can do things like I can. We'll read them out together, then we'll come back and I'll show you a couple of the oddities that deserve pointing out. Ani and Anochi, I. Notice that first person forms for I and we are not masculine or feminine. They're common to both genders. This is going to be true throughout the language. First person forms don't differentiate between masculine and feminine. Ata, you, masculine singular. At, you, feminine singular. And now the two that you remember as the far demonstratives from last time. Who, the third masculine singular pronoun he, and Hebrew he, English she, the third feminine singular pronoun. In the Torah, almost always spelled strangely with a vav. More about this in a minute. Once more, Hebrew who is English he, H-E. Hebrew he is English she. Now the plurals. Anachnu, we. Atem, you, masculine or mixed plural. Atena, you, feminine plural. Once aten, matching atem. Haim and hema, they, masculine plural, or for a mixed group. Hena, they in the feminine plural, and hain matching haim when it's a suffix. Once more, ani or anochi, I, ata and at, you, who and he are he and she, anachnu, we, atem and atena, you in the plural, haim or hema, and hena, they in the plural. In the Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the third person singular who and he also have longer forms, like hema and hena, hua and hia, but those forms don't occur in the Bible. The first person singular I has two completely different forms, ani and anochi, that are both quite common. Ani occurs about twice as often in the Bible as anochi, but even anochi still occurs hundreds of times. There's very little difference between them. Anochi might be a tad more formal or more emphatic than ani. Notice that all the second person pronouns, the four you forms, all have taf with a dagesh. We know from other Semitic languages that there's a nun hiding in that dagesh, but you'll never see it in the Hebrew forms. It does appear in the Bible, but only in the Aramaic parts of Daniel and Ezra, never in Hebrew. Let's take a quick look at at, the feminine singular form of the second person pronoun you. You may remember that I told you a Hebrew word can never end with a double consonant, and this one doesn't either. Look closely. There's a dagesh in the taf, which represents that missing nun, but that's not the end of the word. There's also a shva underneath that taf. We're going to see this combination again when we learn the verb endings. If the consonant is the last thing in the word, its dagesh will always drop out, but if there's a vowel underneath it, the dagesh can stay. And finally, one of the most perplexing words in the Bible, he, Hey, Yud, Aleph, the third feminine singular pronoun. She shot the sheriff. It's spelled with a yud to indicate that E sound, but in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, that spelling occurs only 11 times. All the other times, a couple of hundred times, it's spelled with a vav. It's still got a chirik under the hey, so you can tell that it's supposed to be pronounced he if you look carefully, and that it's the feminine form, but you have to be careful not to let your eyes trick you. Why did they do that? I could name one scholar who's got a theory about it, but I don't think there's an explanation yet that has convinced everyone, so it's still something of a mystery. One more review before we move on. Ani and Anochi, I, Anachnu, we. Ata, At, Atem, and Aten or Atena all mean you. Don't forget, our English word you was originally only used for the plural. When you're reading an older Bible translation and you see thou, you know that the Hebrew is singular ata or at. And in the third person, who and he, Haim and Hema, and Hena. I'll remind you that it's good to have biblical phrases that help you remember different words and forms. You need to collect them on your own through your own reading if they're going to stick in your head, but here are a couple to get you started. First, something that God likes to say in the Bible a lot. Ani Adonai, I am the Lord, 200 times. He only says Anochi Adonai 11 times. And one more, this is a fun one, from 2 Samuel 12:7. After King David sleeps with Bathsheba and has her husband Uriah killed, Nathan the prophet comes to him with a cock and bull story about some rich man who steals a poor man's lamb. David is outraged and he says, that man deserves to die. Vayomer Natan el David, Nathan said to David, one of the great lines of all time. Ata ha'ish, you are the man. That's a good start on the subject pronouns. I am the Lord, Ani Adonai, and you are the man, Ata ha'ish. One more quick review of all of them. Ani and Anochi, I. Ata and At, you. Who and he and she, that's the singulars. Now the plurals, Anachnu, we. Atem and Atena, you in the plural. Haim and Hema, and feminine Hena for they. Once more, this time make sure you say them with me. Ani and Anochi, Ata and At, who and he. Anachnu, Atem and Atena, Haim and Hema, and Hena. Very good, Tov Meod. Now, English has all these other pronouns, like me, that you can't use as the subject of the sentence, unless you're Tarzan. But in Hebrew, none of those other pronouns are separate words. The subject pronouns are. You can say the word ani, and it means I, but there are no separate words for me or my. All these other pronouns in Hebrew are attached to the word where you need the pronoun. Remember that pronouns can be built into verbs as well. We've been translating Vayomer Elohim as and God said, but Vayomer by itself is a perfectly good word, and he said. If you have a noun subject, you don't want to say the pronoun. Vayomer Moshe, not and Moses he said, but just Moses said. but that Yod of Vayomer is the mark of the third masculine singular, he, if you need a subject in English. As we saw in an earlier lesson, if you change that mark from Yud to Taf, you have she said, Vatomer. If you change it to a Nun, you have we, Vanomer, and we said. We will learn these verb forms in a lesson soon from now. This time, we're going to focus on the pronouns that attach to nouns and prepositions as suffixes. And all of these attach as suffixes, like the O of Malko, his king, that we've seen before. These suffixes come in three different flavors. Suffixes that attach to singular nouns and some prepositions, suffixes that attach to plural nouns and some other prepositions, and a third variety kind of related to verbs that's also used with a couple of prepositions and some other words too. First, the suffixes that attach to singular nouns. These are also the suffixes that are used with the prepositions bet and lamed, be and l, which we've also seen a couple of times. Remember that bet means in or at, and lamed means to or for. Now, let's learn the suffixes systematically. Like all of the pronouns, they have three dimensions: person, first, second, or third, gender, masculine, feminine, or common, and number, singular or plural. PGN, person, gender, and number. We're going to look at them in two ways. First, with the preposition lamed, to me, to you, to a dog named Boo, and then with the word melech, my king, your king, his king, her king. E is me or my, li, to me, my king, malki. That final kaf is you or your in the singular. With a kamatz, it's masculine, cha. With the shva, it's feminine, ech or ach. As you know from the word melech, final kaf always has a vowel sign tucked up in the corner of it. If there's no vowel, the sign is a shva. Notice that with malkecha, malkecha, and malkech, the original final kaf of melech isn't final anymore. It's just a regular kaf. But by coincidence, the second person suffix is a kaf, and in the singular forms, it's almost always final. And there it is with lecha and lach, to you. Him and his is the O suffix that we've seen so many times. Her and hers is a. We talked about it last time. A is the normal ending for feminine singular nouns and adjectives, like tova, but when it's the third feminine singular suffix, the hey has to have that mapik in it. Watch very carefully. If you're the kind of person who works by ear, by the sound of the word, you have to notice that mapik and mentally exaggerate the sound, malkach. Now the plurals. First person, enu, ours or us. The second person, we're back to an ending with kaf, but in the plural, it's a longer, heavier ending. Chem for the masculine form, chen or chena for the feminine form. And the third person endings, them and theirs, am and on. Brackets mean that precise form doesn't occur in the Bible, but this is what the form would be. So your king or their king, referring to groups of women, that precise word is not actually in the Bible, but you can see the correct endings this way. Let's compare these endings to the subject pronouns. This is how you'll learn them, by noting the family resemblances. Ani and anochi, meaning I, match li, to me. In the four second-person forms, the you forms, the subject pronoun has a taf, the suffix has a kaf, but they sound similar. Ata and lacha, at and lach. In the third person, it's the o and the a that matter. The pronouns are a little bit different, but who as a suffix without the aleph, actually a fairly common ending as well. Here's an example. The word for species is min. In the Bible, interestingly, it only ever occurs in the phrase, according to its species, le mino, or leminehu, both of those if the noun is masculine, lemina if the noun is feminine. This kind of mean is always spelled with a yud. This is not the same as the preposition mean, from, which never has a yud. Mino and minehu are just variants on the same ending, third masculine singular. See them in Genesis 1:11 and 1:12. And hey with a mapik for the third feminine singular. Again, not so much like the subject pronoun he, but it is like the feminine singular of tov tova. Just don't forget that kamatz mapik hey is telling you her or hers. Now the plurals, anachnu, lanu. There's something about that nu sound that said us to the ancient Israelites. Second person plural, again, the subject pronoun has a taf, the suffix has a kaf. It's atem, y'all, and lachem, two or four, y'all. Feminine changed the mem to a nun, aten and atena, with lamed, lachena. Third person, they, masculine heim and feminine hen, lahem and lahen. I'll say it once more. Do your best to recognize these patterns and repetitions and resemblances. The more sense the resemblances make to you, the quicker you will learn the endings, which is absolutely essential. Now the next kind of endings, the ones that are added to plural nouns. Again, you'll find that they're very similar to the ones we've already seen. These are also added to a different set of prepositions, and particularly to the two very important prepositions we've already learned. El, that's another way to say to, and al, meaning on or upon or over or above. I'm using ben, son or child here instead of melech, because people don't have multiple kings as often as they have multiple children. The endings are very similar to the ones used with singular nouns, quite often identical, except for what connects them to the noun. It's a vowel and a yud. Let's look at the plurals first. When the suffixes are plural and the noun is plural, you use the suffixes we already learned, except that you attach them with tsere yud, lachem, le u plural, but el u plural is alechem. You attach the plural suffixes to an a sound when the noun is also plural. Now there's two different kinds of plural nouns, right? There are im plurals and ot plurals. When it's an ot plural, just add these endings. Let's take the plural of av, father or ancestor, masculine noun, but the plural is avot, as you remember. Let's attach these plural endings. Our ancestors, avotenu. Your ancestors, avotechem and avotechen. Their ancestors, avotehem and avotehen. When it's an im plural, like banim, children, you have to remove the im ending first before you add these possessives. So banim minus im is ban, giving us banenu. Benechem, benechen, benehem, benehen. Remember that when the accent moves farther away from the first syllable, the vowel there can be shortened. The singular possessives on a plural noun are not quite the same as on a singular noun, but they are very reminiscent. Bini, my son, but banai, my sons. Bincha, your son, banecha, your children. Benech, banayich. A slightly tricky one. Beno, banav, his son and his sons. It's that same vav, but pronounced as a consonant instead of an O vowel, banav. And the yud here is silent, an extremely common ending that you must learn ASAP. Kamatz yud vav av. This yud in banecha, banav, and baneha is the one place where a yud is written but not pronounced. So why is it there at all? Answer: remember that this language was up and running for 2,000 years before the vowel points were invented. All they had to indicate vowels with was the letters. So that letter yud is always there before the possessive suffix to tell you it's a plural noun. That av ending, banav, avotav, elohav, always tells you that it's his of some noun with a plural ending. Banim, avot, even Elohim. Most often Elohim is a singular noun, but it's got a plural ending. So you drop that im ending and add the suffixes that go with the plural noun, even if the noun has a singular meaning. Elohav, his God, with a capital G. And another reminder, you don't have to be able to use these endings yourself. All you have to do is recognize them. But recognizing them is incredibly important. You may remember a vocabulary word or not, but these endings, you have to know them automatically, anatomically, at the spinal cord level. Your rational brain should not be involved. Save your brain power for more difficult and interesting things, and just learn these endings ASAP. And now, one more set of endings, mostly used when the pronoun is the object of a verb, but they are also the endings that are used with a few other words, and one of them is the incredibly common preposition min, from. And be warned, min only adds an extra mem before these endings, and the nun of min assimilates to that mem. With other words, that second mem is not part of the ending. All right, now here we go. Mimeni, mimecha, mimech, mimenu, mimena. Mimenu, mikem, miken, mehem, and mehen or mehena. Second and third person plural forms don't have this special kind of suffix. Again, the endings that tell you who we're talking about are essentially the same. What's going on here in most of these forms is that the connector is an N sound, that whole syllable N, not mean me, but me many. But it's still E at the end that means me. Me many from me. The one tricky one is me menu. First common plural from us, me menu, no problem. But now look at the third masculine singular, from him or from it. Exactly the same, me menu. What happened? You know how a nun likes to assimilate to another consonant? Well, this time the tables are turned. We have a perfectly normal third masculine singular suffix, hu, jammed right up against the nun of the connecting syllable, me menu. Now, a nun is weaker than a lot of other consonants, but not than a hey. Hey, buddy, this time you can be the negation, I get to be the consonant. So that enu ending can be us, the way you'd expect from nu, but even more often it's him or it, because enhu has changed into enu. Takes a little getting used to, but eventually it will start to seem normal. You can remind yourself by going to Genesis 2:17 and another 6 places in Genesis 3, where they're talking about the tree of good and evil. You're not supposed to eat from it. Lo tochal mimenu. You shall not eat from it, not from us. We're going to look at a verse from day 4 of creation this time. But first, a quick review of the first kind of endings we learned today, one of which we will see there, and one last irregularity. You remember that there are three categories of vowels in Hebrew, a, I, u. Vowels rarely change from one category to another in the same situation, unless there's some special need to do so. The particle et is one of those cases. We've seen et as a marker of the definite direct object, but it also does double duty as a preposition, with. When it means with, and you add a suffix, the e vowel of et becomes I. With me, et. With you, itcha. With her, ita, and so forth. That's the normal thing that you would expect. But when et is marking the definite direct object and you need to add a suffix, the vowel becomes o. He saw me, ra'a oti. He heard him, shama oto. Oti, otcha and otach, oto and ota. Otanu, etchem and etchen, otam, and mostly ethen. All right, our story so far, Genesis 1:14, Vayomer Elohim, and God said, Yehi, let there be, me'orot, lights, birkia hashamayim, in the firmament of the sky, lehavdil, to separate, ben hayom uven halayla, between the day and the night. Vehayu, and they will be, leotot, for signs, ulemoadim, and for set times, calendar dates, uleyamim veshanim, and for days and years, yamim and shanim. And in Genesis 1:16, God made them. Vaya'as Elohim et shnei hame'orot hagedolim. God made the two great lights. Et hama'or hagadol lememshelet hayom, the great light for the governance of the day, ve'et hama'or hakaton lememshelet halayla, and the small light for the governance of the night, ve'et hakochavim, and the stars. Now our new verse this time, Genesis 1:17, phrase by phrase. And God put them, vayiten otam Elohim, birkia hashamayim, as in verse 14, in the firmament of the sky, leha'ir, to cause light, to shine. You remember lehavdil, to separate. This is leha'ir, to shine light, a verb related to the noun for light, or al ha'aretz, on the earth. Let's look again at that first phrase, vayiten otam Elohim. We translated this as God put them, but the Hebrew word order is, and put them God. So we need to talk about word order for a minute. Most languages are SVO languages, subject, verb, object. I saw the dog, subject, verb, object. But it's useful to think of Biblical Hebrew as a VSO language, verb, subject, object. You all know Vayomer Elohim, and God said, and you know that Elohim means God. Vayomer, and said, marked by that yud for a third masculine singular subject, comes first, and the actual subject, Elohim, comes afterward. Verb, subject, Vayomer Elohim, instead of the English subject, verb, God said. VSO, because the object of the verb, the O, comes after the subject, the same way it does in English. Here's an example we've seen from Genesis 1:27. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam. God created the human. Vayivra, and, brackets, he created, but here comes the subject, Elohim, so we don't need or want the pronoun he. And now the object, marked by et, the definite direct object marker, et ha'adam, the human. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam. But when the object is a pronoun, it likes to precede the subject. That's what happened in Genesis 1:17 on day 4 of creation. Vayitain otam Elohim, God put them. First otam, because it's a pronoun, and only then the subject Elohim. One of the things I'll ask you to do in Numbers 22 this time is to find a verb followed by an indirect object pronoun suffix and then a noun subject. Hint, the pronoun suffix is on the preposition el, and noun verbed to pronoun. But in Hebrew, the word order will be verb, el with suffix, noun. Look in an English translation to find it if you need to. And you should also be able to find 5 different independent pronouns, subject pronouns, and 5 different pronominal suffixes in that chapter. Next time, how letters behave. See you then.